Oh, I heard about the company as a customer. Whenever I came to New York to meet with investors, I was on Uber constantly. Like, I loved the product. It was magic.
This week we have Dara Khosrowshahi, the legendary executive who transformed Expedia through major acquisitions and now guides Uber across more than 70 countries.
We transitioned not just from mobility, but to mobility of multiple types of transport. X, reserve, black, two-wheelers, three-wheelers. Uber now even has taxi on the platform. And then, of course, eventually getting into Uber Eats, and not just mobility for people, but mobility and delivery of anything and everything.
He stepped into Uber at a pivotal moment in 2017, taking on one of the most visible leadership transitions in Silicon Valley.
And there was this drama in terms of the delete Uber days as to who was going to run the company. I was having drinks with Daniel Ek, and he's like, did a headhunter call you about Uber? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, I said, no way I'm doing that. I'm at Expedia, 13 years. I've been working with Barry. There's a lot of trust there. I love it. I'm happy. And he looks at me. He's like, you're right for this company. You can have an impact. Since when is life about happiness start?
I'm Enrique Dubugras, and welcome to HD and HD. This episode is brought to you by Brex, a brand I'm proud to have co-founded and one that's shaped by the same journey many of you are on. Brex has everything startups and fast-growing companies need to make every dollar count, from modern corporate cards, banking, and treasury, to accounting, automation, travel, and expenses. Over 25,000 companies, including DoorDash, Scale AI, and Anthropic, spend smarter using Brex.
Dara, thank you so much for doing this, man. Really appreciate it.
Happy to do it. Absolutely.
I was trying to think about the first time we met, and I don't remember if this was the first time. It was one of the first times. I think we met in Davos.
Yes.
And
in the snow and running from meeting to meeting.
Exactly. And I'm curious, what do you make of that conference? It's such the first time I went, it was the spring one. So it was very nice, but then it got kind of not as nice. And I think people think it's this super fancy thing.
Yes.
People go there for the world, but it's a grind, man.
Totally. No, it's exactly, I was going to say, use those words. It is an absolute grind. It's highly efficient, right? Which is you have meeting after meeting. It's like speed dating. Other businesses, government officials, regulators, et cetera. And for us, it gets me a lot of exposure to the European markets or other European partners who we might have. But it's exhausting. It is absolutely exhausting. But it works. It's efficient. I wish it weren't in that faraway land, but It is, and everyone comes there. And at least everyone comes there. Everyone's engaged with each other. There's nothing to distract you in the outside world.
What's your view on how that came to be? It's such an odd thing to have happen in the world. Everyone just convenes in this place in Switzerland.
I'm actually reading this Steven Pinker book. I think it's called Common Knowledge. It's about how these systems appear in societies or creating societies where people essentially agree to certain rules that are essentially made up that then makes society kind of move forward. The concept of a company. Why is Uber a company? Why am I the CEO? They're these kind of accepted rules that allow people to organize in certain ways to be more effective than they would be on a standalone basis. And then you see it in retail. In New York City, where we are now, there's I think it's on somewhere on Canal or something like that. There's this area where it's all these lighting shops, right? And it's one store after the other. You go into the store and it's 28,000 pieces of different lighting fixtures, and all of them are on the same street. And you're like, well, why would you put a lighting shop next to a lighting shop? Because that's the most competitive street out there. But it's a category that anyone who kind of knows New York is familiar with. And if I need lighting, I should go there, right? And so there's kind of a mass that creates versus Joe's lighting shop. I'm never going to remember that, but that's a lighting district. And I think the same is true in terms of conferences, Davos, et cetera. There's a magic that you have to create. There's a liquidity that you have to create to get a group there. But then once there's a spark, then you can kind of keep it going. And I don't know how Davos came to be, but the staying power is extraordinary.
Well, I have a theory that, this is my theory of how it came to be, is that it is an all-paid vacation for a ski trip for government officials. So they go there because, you're some minister of something in Pakistan, and you get a Switzerland ski trip. And because every time I go there,
government officials like skiing.
They like skiing.
There we go.
And, that's good. And then, all the CEOs of big companies go there to, policymakers. And then all the CEOs of the smaller companies go there to hustle the CEO of big companies, sell them some stuff, So
it's one giant hustle.
Just like one giant hustle around a paid ski trip. That's
I will tell you,
thesis.
I have not been skiing in Davos yet. I swear to myself, I'm going to get one day of skiing in, and it's impossible.
I went one day. Turns out it's only government people there. That's how I came up with this
That's
theory.
the evidence. Exactly.
That's the evidence.
There we go.
There was no private sector. It was only government. So.
You got to have pull to pull the government folks, and then everyone else follows.
Exactly. But was that, was post-Uber the first time you went, or previous in your career you ended up
No, I started going as a result of Uber. And obviously Uber, I was running Expedia before, and Expedia didn't kind of have to deal with the regulatory frameworks that Uber has to, right? We're a highly regulated business, country to country, state to state, city to city, sometimes even airport to airport. Regulations can be different. So having dialogue with regulators and talking about what our perspective is and what their perspective is, it's super valuable. And again, really, really efficient.
Yeah, no, I get it.
But it was totally foreign to me at the time. Like, what is this Davos get together? Why am I talking to government officials? Like, it's a muscle that I've had to build over time, and it's pretty cool learning things, as you get into a new role.
Yeah, no, it's definitely part of the life experience.
Yes.
And all that.
One day I'll get a skiing. We'll see.
Exactly. Maybe let's go back to your history. One of the things I remember seeing some tweet about the history of your family.
Yeah.
Is how many people in your family from Iran came here with basically nothing, and then a lot of you just crushed it in life. Maybe tell that story a little bit. How did that happen?
Well, we've been very lucky. We have a big family in Iran, and it was kind of a merchant family. It originated in the north. My great grandfather and his brothers were merchants. We came to Tehran, which is the capital of Iran, and built a company that was manufacturing pharmaceuticals and other consumer goods that we licensed in the West, and then manufactured them, distribute them all over Iran and the Middle East as well. Was one of the largest companies in Iran when the revolution happened. And we weren't a political family one way or the other, but revolutions structurally don't like people in power. And we were one of the biggest families
your grandfather,
in Iran.
Great-grandfather.
My grandfather, great-grandfather started the company, and it continued. Every generation was involved in the business in a different way. My father was an engineer, so he designed factories, our manufacturing factories. He was in charge of designing and running the factories. The revolution happened, and we all had to leave the country, and essentially the government took over our company, and we lost everything.
And what was the culture of the family, right? If everyone was kind of working in the family business, and what was being passed down to you guys at that time?
I think one, it was a super successful business, super well known locally, and there was always this feeling of responsibility to helping Iran grow and the local economy grow. The Shah was trying to modernize the economy, was trying to modernize society. And being a part of that, being one of the industrialist families in Iran, one of the leading industrialist families in Iran, was a super important position to be in. And I think that the kids, all of our parents, one way or the other, worked at the company. So that was the expectation that we would go to school. I think we would probably go to boarding school someplace in the West and have kind of the Western education that's prized in a lot of these other countries, and then come back and be a part of the family business. It was always a part of expectations growing up in Iran.
And it was the culture's you can be in a family, but it was hey, you have to study really hard, you have to work really hard. Those are values that
education is everything. Education was absolutely everything. That was kind of the gateway. And then, I think for my dad, I honestly didn't see him a lot. He would kind of show up at dinner once in a while. He was always working.
So you were born
Always
there.
working. I was born in Iran.
You were
Yeah, I
born
was
there.
born in Iran, and the business, just the identity was we were always with family, and family kind of ran this business. So it was part of life for us.
And how old were you when the revolution kind of happened?
9 years old.
You're 9.
9 years old. So I was young, and young kids can adjust much more readily than older folks. So I think the revolution was, while we lost everything as a family, I think the kids were able to adjust in a much more ready way, so to speak.
But in practice, when you say you lost everything, did they just like take it, say, hey, this factory is now mine? How did that even work?
We left the country. My father did not take much money outside of the country. He identified with kind of the mission of building industry locally. We thought we would go back. We didn't expect the country to essentially take our company. And the company still operates.
It still operates today?
It still operates to this day. So,
What?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's a big company in Iran as we speak. It's just the government took possession of it.
Wow.
And so we just lost it. And so for my family, for the grownups in the family, they lost everything that they worked for. We went from in Iran living in a mansion and staff and all that to living in a 3-bedroom condo in Tarrytown, New York. It was just a total shock to the system. We had enough money for my parents to pay for a private education. So I think we were luckier than most people, just to put things in perspective. But where we came from was some seriously rarefied air. And that was a tough adjustment for my parents.
That's so interesting. And how do you think it changed your parents?
It hurt my dad a lot because work was his whole life. And he tried to establish businesses here in the US. It really didn't work out. So he wasn't the man that he was in Iran. It really changed his life and for the worse. And my mom had to get on with it. My dad actually went back to Iran and he wasn't able to leave Iran for 6 years.
Oh, wow.
So my mom was raising 3 boys by herself in the US, had to get a job. She worked at a sales clerk in Bloomingdale's and then Celine, et cetera. So this is a woman who shopped all her life and then actually had to work behind the counter. And so for her, it was just, do what she had to do and raise these kids and hopefully hope that the kids didn't turn out to be terrible kids, which we didn't. Thank God. She was a great mom.
And when you say that your dad couldn't leave, what does it mean? They took his passport or something? Like what was that?
They just wouldn't let him out of the country. They detained him. He went there because his father was at his deathbed and his father miraculously recovered, but he just couldn't leave the country. And then I still remember he finally got out of Iran. It was a flight through Paris. When he was on the flight, a person from the Revolutionary Guard came onto the flight and asked for him. So they were going to pull him off the flight. He obviously didn't volunteer his name. He had a heart attack on the flight.
No.
Yeah, on the flight, went to Paris, had like 3 hours of time to change the plane, then Paris to New York. The minute he arrived, he was just like blue. And my mom took him straight to the hospital. He had triple bypass surgery and he lived until he was 91.
Wow.
It's crazy.
Were you aware of everything that was happening?
I saw him come and obviously it was like, hugs to dad, but we had to rush him off to the hospital. And it was a shock. One, it was a shock seeing my dad after so many years because he had been someone who I looked up to and I'd grown so much. All of a sudden he was like just a much smaller person.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
then seeing the vulnerability of your father in the hospital is just something you can't prepare for. Thank God he was fine and it changed his life. He lived a healthy life, et cetera. But it's a real shock to the system because I idolized my father.
And at that moment in time, did you also realize the difference in rarefied air at that age?
We knew that we had lost our business or we thought that we were going to lose our business. But I'd also tell you, I had a happy childhood. I went to a great school. We always had family around us. Family has been the constant in my life growing up in Iran, my early years in the US. So I'd say we had a happy childhood. At the same time, we knew that we had lost the family business. And I think that, immigrants kind of have a chip on their shoulder. And for us, it was a bigger chip because not only were we immigrants who had a chance to prove ourselves in the US. We were immigrants who had come from a background of a family who was incredibly accomplished. So I guess I had a chip on both shoulders. And as a result, I think a lot of my other family members, my brothers, my cousins, et cetera, have done really, really well. But there's a very large kind of immigrant Iranian population who has gone into technology, who's gone into medicine, and has, is a big part of the tech ecosystem to this day in the US.
So tell us about your other family. So you're one of how many brothers?
I'm the youngest of 3 total brothers. So I have 2 older brothers.
Makes sense. So what do your brothers do? What do your cousins do? Just tell a little bit, like kind of like what, so people can understand how accomplished your family is, as a whole, which is really impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. So my oldest brother, Merad, works at OceanX, which is a very, very cool company exploring all the oceans and helping keep them environmentally sound. Kaveh, my older brother, middle brother, I think he works at Allen & Company, which is my first job, my first full-time job once I got out of college. And then I've got a ton of cousins. In like Iran, you have, enormous amount of cousins, but, a couple of them, Hadi Partovi started code.org, which is offering coding to teach kids in public schools all over the world, not just in the US. And then Ali Partovi is a part of Accelerator Neo, and has done great. So we got a big family. We've got lots of accomplished cousins and brothers, et cetera.
Yeah, no, that's really impressive. And as you know, I'm having a kid soon, so I'm trying to learn about these family cultures. And
there's nothing you can do. It is like you have in your mind an exact game plan, and then these children grow up and they take unexpected turns. And you got to be there for them and to love them and to teach them. But they're going to, your little creature is going to turn into his or her own person, despite what you may dream about. It's really humbling being a parent.
Yeah. I'm about to go through that experience. So let's talk a little bit about then your high school years. So how were you in high school?
How was I in high school? I was a good student. And that was kind of an expectation. I was a good athlete. So soccer, with what you call it here, was, that was Iran's national sport. It was often the national sport of many countries outside of the US.
Brazil as well.
Yeah, exactly. So we were ace soccer players when we came into the US. And that was a great way to fit in, right? We're foreigners. We don't really speak the language, et cetera. But on the soccer field, we were absolute stars. My brother Kaveh was like absolute killer of a player. But it was a great high school education, and I was strong in sports and I was strong in academics. And I'd say I was kind of your average high schooler, so to speak, shy. Didn't really feel comfortable in my own skin, but I got through just fine.
And do you think that if you asked your teachers back then, hey, will this kid be like as successful as you are today? Do you think your teachers would have said yes or no?
I think they probably would have said yes. I mean, I was I was a respectful student, so I wasn't a rebel one way or the other, and I was always a good student. And I think in Iran, just because of society, you really respect your elders, you listen to your elders. So I was one of the good kids in school. And
then how was the college application process? Like that's the whole thing for immigrants, right?
Yeah, totally. So I took I don't know if you call it unusual route. My oldest brother, Merad, went to Brown University, and I worship him. So I'm like, if Merad went to Brown, I'm going to go to Brown, and applied early to Brown and got in. And it was simple. And I remember at the time you wrote your application. You didn't have this like whole machinery designed to get to kids into college. So I don't know if today I get into Brown, but I was lucky that I did.
It's getting harder every year, man.
Yeah. It's terrible. Yeah. It's terrible. Yeah.
Makes sense. And how was your Brown experience?
It was great. I studied engineering. I studied bioelectrical engineering. My dad said I could study anything I wanted as long as I could either become a doctor or an engineer. So it was a perfect hedge, bioelectrical engineering, because I could go to med school or not. And I loved engineering, just the learning how to build things, the rules around math, problem solving, et cetera. Engineering for me was a really, really great background for me then to go into business. But I really enjoyed it.
And did you know what you wanted to do already at that point in your life or no?
No. I mean, just being honest, I knew I needed to make money, right? Like my parents spent all their money sending us to private school. They were very clear. So I always worked in school. I worked as a teacher's associate. I had to pay for, food, all that stuff. And so I knew I had to have a job getting out of school, and I had to have good grades to get a job. And that was my mission at the time, so to speak. I was going to go into kind of an engineering fellowship with a manufacturing company, but then I fell in love with a girl in New York City who was a commodities trader. And I racked my brain, how do I find a job in New York? There weren't engineering jobs in New York. So that was actually what led me to investment banking, to Allen and Company. Was falling in love with a commodities trader and kind of chasing her in New York.
Or
no, she was downtown working, I think it was like Makata or something like that. She was a commodities trader there. And I followed her. As you would have it, I broke up with her 6 months later, but it got me into investment banking in New York City.
So what was Allen Company back? Which year is this roughly?
This is I graduated in 91. I had been an intern at Allen and Company previously. And
how did that happen?
My brother.
Your brother
hooked me up. Yeah. Totally.
He got the job there, and
he got a job there, and we knew the Allen family at Hackley. They were dear friends. Kaveh was best friends with Herb Allen, who runs the firm. I was best friends with Charlie Allen, so we knew the family very, very well.
From where?
From school, from high school.
From high school.
Yeah. So it's just luck of the draw.
Oh wow!
Like literally luck. And
it was Herb's parents that started the firm, or grandparents?
I think Herbert Allen, so Herb's grandfather and Charlie Allen started the firm. And then Herbert followed, and then Herb after him. So it's a family business, kind of stayed the same size for years and years and years. And my first job was at the risk arbitrage desk. So risk arbitrage is a form of trading where when one company announces that they're going to buy another company, you buy kind of the stock of the target and make some kind of arbitrage between signing and closing.
Before machines did that.
Well, at the time, Allen and Company was not automated at all. And there was a little Mac in the corner, and I was an engineer. And I remember at the end of every day, there are these like giant panels where you would allocate the trading to the various accounts, and people would be like using their calculators, adding, subtracting. I like wrote a program to automate all of it, pretty simple stuff in terms of programming. And like they thought I was a wizard. So that was I just got lucky because I found the computer and I kind of did some simple programming, and that kind of got me a decent repitation within Allen and Company.
And what was their business back then? It was mostly investment banking. It was like
it was.
What was the business?
It was. I mean, they had institutional sales and risk arbitrage trading. So there's a trading side of the business, but the bigger side of the business was mergers and acquisitions, advice, and then raising capital, IPOs or private capital for folks. And I jumped into that side of the equation, which is, I kind of risk arbitrage is trading on M&A. So I understood the markets pretty well, but I want to understand what is it that makes a deal successful? Why does one company try to buy another company? And I had an interesting viewpoint of the markets because I knew how markets viewed M&A. Now I wanted to advise companies on, how to buy, how to sell, or sometimes not to buy.
At that time, like M&A and investment banking was the hottest career one to have, right?
Totally, yeah.
So you were probably thrilled at that moment in time.
Oh yeah, I mean it was a great ride, and Allen and Company had a specialty, if you want to call that, of media, and so they were very embedded into the Disneys of the world, ABCs of the world, Sony Pictures, etc. So it was, the media companies were the kings of the world, and these media executives were all larger than life figures. And, and I got to work for them. It was a really exciting time.
Was Sun Valley already a thing back then?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was,
Did you go back then?
of course.
Yeah.
I worked at the Sun Valley conference and I was setting up all the meetings, all that stuff. It was a really exciting time.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What did you learn about business working at Allen that like the way they did things that kind of stuck with you after?
It's funny. Probably the most important lesson I learned at Allen and Company wasn't mathematical. It wasn't based on models, et cetera. It was, I remember Herbert Allen always talking about how he bet on people. He's like, good companies come and go. Good people stay good. And just bet on people in your life and you'll be fine. And so it is a bank and they make money the way banks do through fees, et cetera. But they really build their relationships, personal relationships with their clients over a period of time. They tell clients what they don't want to hear. And so for me, an appreciation of these relationships and betting on people in my life, both personally and professionally, it's probably the biggest lesson I learned at Allen, funny enough.
And did you learn what kind of people to bet on? Like what was the learnings and like, hey, these are the traits,
I think for me, the most important was people who were loyal and people who told the truth. Were certain clients who you saw who, they would sell you in terms of expectations. They would sell you in terms of what they were going to do. And then there were some executives who I saw who, there's some selling going on in an executive, but they would tell you both the good and the bad of their company. And they came from kind of this truth-telling place. And those were the people who I was always attracted to.
Makes sense. No, super awesome. So how long were you there and what happened after that?
I was there for 8 years. And it was a great run. I thought I was going to stay at Allen Company my whole life. I was the youngest VP there. I had my own book of business. I liked kind of video games and technology. So I started shifting more towards a technical client base than the traditional entertainment client base there. And then I met Barry Diller. And I was a junior banker originally on this deal, a Paramount deal, where he was running QVC at the time, and he made a hostile tender offer for Paramount.
Which side were you on?
I was on Barry's side. I was on, I've been on Barry's side for many, many years. And it was so fun. It was really thrilling, which is like, it was just this whole bidding process, bid goes in on Tuesday and then we put in another bid on Thursday. It was just incredibly energizing, worked incredibly hard. We lost, but I got to know Barry, and I was the analyst working on these M&A models, and he wanted to really understand the model. So we after that deal, even though we lost, I kind of became his banker. And he started over again with Home Shopping Network and decided to do another roll-up. Silver King to Home Shopping was TV stations, then buy Home Shopping. And he wanted to buy a bunch of other companies. He bought a company called USA Networks. And he had no infrastructure. He didn't have anybody. He had like a couple of folks working for him. And he said, I want you to work full-time for me. And at that point, I'd always looked at Barry and I was like, if there's one person that I want to work for in my life outside of Allen and Company, it's that person. So when I had the chance to go full time, he was charismatic and he was fun. I was more of a shy kid. I was the youngest brother. We have thousands of cousins. I'm one of the younger cousins. And so I always wanted to kind of fit in. I was a fit-in kind of kid, and I did well. But Barry was this like larger than life figure, and when he walked into the room, the whole room lit up, and he didn't suffer fools. He would call bullshit out on anybody, and I was just attracted to him. Honestly, I knew he was smart, but he was a guy who succeeded everywhere he went, and then the way that he failed at Paramount, which is we lost the bidding war. Sumner Redstone won the prize, so to speak. He was like, they won, we lost next. Right? So it's people show their best selves when they're winning. I think the test of who you really are is when you lose. That's when you show kind of your worst self. And I was like, huh. It wasn't some like made up PR announcement. We did our best. They won. We lost. Next. And to me, that shows someone who is indefatigable, like they're not going to step down. So I wanted to hitch my little train on his locomotive. And it was a great decision.
I've only met Barry last couple of years. You know him for a long time.
Did you get to know him when you first joined the Expedia board, or did you know him before?
I met him maybe a year before that or something like that.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Not super long ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And how different he is today than back then, or is it exactly the same?
He's chilled out. He's chilled out. Like, I mean, he's still intense.
Wow, this is the chilled out version?
This is a chilled out version.
Wow.
I mean, Barry was really intense, just went all out. He loves confrontation. He loves pushing people to their limits and seeing, whether they come up with a better idea and who they are. So he's definitely chilled out. But there's always an intensity about him, as you know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised this is the chilled out version.
It's definitely a chilled out version.
So when you work for, what was your position, I guess? What was the first time?
Since I was a banker, I was leading strategic planning and mergers and acquisitions for them. So we went and, started with Home Shopping, USA Networks, and then we started buying a bunch of companies, Ticketmaster.
This is already IAC.
It was the pre-IAC, right? So it was called USA Networks and then USA Interactive, and then it became IAC. So lots of name changes.
Which year is this?
This is like 98, I think I joined IAC, 98, 99. I joined
so pre-bubble
IAC.
burst.
Yeah. And then we bought a bunch of companies, Ticketmaster, Match.com, Expedia, Hotels.com, Hotwire, kind of serially moving more into the interactive space. And then we sold, the design spec was, let's have a company that's both in media and is in internet transactions at the same time. The conclusion we came to is we couldn't get to scale in media. And if you can't get to scale in the media business, there just wasn't enough for us to buy. The prices were all wrong. If you can't get scale in media, Barry said, well, then let's get out of media and let's completely focus on internet and internet commerce.
Tell me more about that. Like, why couldn't you get to scale in media, and why did that matter?
The assets were too expensive. So we tried to buy a bunch of assets and we kept losing, so to speak.
Like it was assets like Paramount, that kind of assets.
Yeah, like Paramount, other cable companies, et cetera. They come up for sale, and either we were too cheap or the assets were too expensive. And I think probably in hindsight, we were a little too cheap. And you needed, especially in the cable programming business, which is the business that we were in, you needed to have large portfolios of programming to go and negotiate against the cable operators in terms of how much they would pay you, right? So a cable operator might not, might be willing to not carry USA Networks and Sci-Fi Networks that we had.
Maybe explain just for the audience how the cable business model works. Because I think it's like super.
So this is a long time ago, and the business model is getting disrupted.
Yeah.
But basically, the network business originally was built on advertising, right? You carry a network on a bunch of TV stations, and then you use advertising to bring in money. Early on, as the cable ecosystem was developing, the cable networks didn't have nationwide coverage to build a robust advertising business. So they needed the cable operators, this is, Comcast and TCI at the time, who were making money from, wiring up households with cable. They needed these cable companies to pay them carriage fees in order for them to get big enough to invest in programming to then get nationwide coverage to build an advertising business. Once you did get nationwide coverage and you built an advertising business and you had these cable subscription dollars coming in, it became a dynamite business. We saw that, and a lot of other people saw that. But you needed to package a bunch of networks together to be able to go to these cable operators and negotiate a good deal. Like even now, YouTube TV, which is call it a next generation cable operator because they distribute over the internet, they're having a fight with Disney now, right? And so all the Disney channels are off, and it becomes a game of chicken. And basically size matters in those kinds of negotiations. So we couldn't get to scale there. We thought we'd be one of the smaller players. Assets were getting too expensive. And at that point, Barry decided to get out. And at that point is when we renamed the company Interactive, IAC, Interactive Corp, because we went fully into interactivity and internet commerce.
So you mentioned that maybe you were a little bit too cheap. I guess, what are the M&A lessons from that moment in time where, obviously it crashed a little bit after the internet stuff, but you mentioned that maybe you could have gotten to scale. Like, what were the learnings and lessons there?
I'd say one, we did pretty well because ultimately the full bet on all things internet worked out. And you could say either we got lucky or not. So I think we accidentally got lucky shifting towards the internet. But I do think one lesson that I've learned is, I'm a very mathematical person. Like, I love math. I'm able to, see patterns in math very, very quickly. And the best deals that Barry and I kind of embarked on were deals where we actually overpaid, but recognized that this was a great asset that would have compounding growth for years and years and years. So coming to kind of growth assets with a strict valuation framework of like, how much is this asset worth now? Often misses the point, which is it's not about how much asset could be worth now or next year. How is it going to compound over the next 10 years? You could argue we overpaid for Match.com. We overpaid. We were there was an auction for Hotels.com. We were the top bidder. We were convinced that the compounding of offline travel to online travel, it was just very, very early. We were convinced that it was going to continue for 20 years. And that allowed us to overpay. So I think over a period of time, as we move from traditional assets that have kind of more traditional metrics, growth metrics, to internet assets that can compound for a really, really long time, we kind of learned our lesson that it's not about identifying what's cheap. It's about identifying growth opportunity and kind of compounding on top of compounding. It's magic when that happens.
And you guys usually buy control, right?
Yes. Barry was very big on control. So we didn't want to be an investor, so to speak. We wanted to be an operator.
And what did you what did you do, I guess, once you bought these companies? Were you guys able to inflect like enough change? Like, what did you actually do?
So we brought capital and we brought scale to these businesses. So usually we would bet on entrepreneurs and allow these entrepreneurs to continue. A Rich Barton, who was the entrepreneur who founded Expedia and then after that Zillow, or a Dave Lippman and a Bob Diener who founded Hotels.com. We would keep them on. We would just put more fuel under the fire. We had a big balance sheet. These companies sometimes as a standalone subscale operation didn't have the capital to invest that we had. So we had a hypothesis and then we put money behind that hypothesis, but typically we let the entrepreneurs grow the business.
So it was still a bet on the entrepreneurs, but with control.
Correct. More of a holding company that allowed entrepreneurs to not worry about all the fundraising. Like when you were founding Brex, how much time did you spend raising money?
A lot, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, throw all that BS away and just focus on your operations. And we have the capital. That was the formula.
So how did you grow within IAC? What was your kind of like?
So I started with deals, but then I wanted to get into operations. So once we sold our media assets, it's more fun. It's more fun to build things. It's kind of my engineering background there. I was interested, for a while it was like satisfying what deals work, what deals didn't work. But often deals work because you had operators who then operated the company effectively. And I was like, well, I want to learn about that. So once we sold the media assets, I became CFO of the company. I wanted to get more involved in kind of how you run these companies. And I was more technical than most people.
What was the CFO of a holding company job look like?
I mean, you are a holding company, but it's establishing budgets, investing capital in various teams and holding them accountable. With Barry there, you could really hold them accountable. And that was really fun for a while. And then we came to a point where the CEO of Expedia, we kind of took a bunch of travel businesses and put them together. And the CEO at the time decided, you know what? I don't want to be part of a big holding company. I want to kind of do my own thing. And we didn't have a succession candidate. And I was CFO of IAC at the time. And I kind of came into Barry's office and I said, what about me? I think I can do this. I've been a pretty good CFO for you.
Were you nervous for that meeting?
I don't get nervous.
No?
Try stuff. The worst that can happen is he says no and you're an idiot and, sends me back off to my office. Yeah, I don't know. I think
in theory, that makes a ton of sense, but a lot of people get very nervous still, when they're about to do that.
My wife calls me a robot sometimes. I just stressing out about stuff. It just makes things worse. What's the point?
Yeah.
And so for me, well, this is kind of interesting. I love travel. I was deeply embedded in kind of a bunch of the travel M&A. I knew those teams really, really well. I really admired them. And I was like, yeah, I think I can run this thing. I was totally wrong because I was a disaster of a CEO for the first couple of years. But Barry, he has this saying, he said it before, he'll throw you into the deep end to see if you swim. And I think it was a combination of part desperation because we didn't have a successor. And I think he saw in me the potential of someone who could do something great. And he and I had worked together for a long time. So there was a lot of trust between us. So I got lucky. He said, yeah, go ahead and run it.
How big was the company back then?
Oh God, I have no idea. It was probably
order of magnitude.
20 billion in bookings probably, which was small compared to where it was. It was a holding company. And then what happened was that
now it's like 100-ish billion or something, right?
Yeah.
Just to compare. Yeah. So a fifth of the size.
Yeah. Maybe even smaller. I'm not sure, but it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And at the time, the first kind of winners in online travel were the online travel agents. But the supplier directs, the Uniteds, the Marriotts, et cetera, of the world, they started building out tech and they started going direct to consumers as well. So OTAs, the growth of the OTAs started slowing down.
Which year is this?
This is probably early 2000s, my guess is, or probably mid 2000s. That
was in pre-financial crisis,
post-financial crisis, pre-September, post September 11th too. So actually the mid 2000s,
2010,
right? Yeah, 2010 exactly. And so travel started slowing down, and travel was half the portfolio of IAC. Travel really started pulling down IAC. So it was at that point, and IAC had Match and Ticketmaster, a bunch of other stuff. At that point, we decided to spin off travel to IAC Travel. We renamed it Expedia because it was kind of the ugly duckling in the portfolio.
And how many
so
assets were there at that point? Expedia, Hotels.com?
Expedia, Hotels, Hotwire, TripAdvisor.
So all the M&A have been done already.
Yeah.
At this point.
I mean, most of the M&A. There was M&A afterwards, but the shape of the entity had taken. We called it IAC Travel, and then we renamed it Expedia, became a public company, and I moved to Seattle to run that company.
This episode of HD and HD is brought to you by a brand that's close to my heart, Brex. When we started Brex, it wasn't just about creating another financial product. It was about solving the real gritty challenges that founders and startups face every day. Building something from the ground up is hard enough without having to navigate clunky legacy banks with endless fees. That's why Brex is the financial stack that scales with you, no matter where you are on your journey. From maximizing runway to earning yield on your cash, Brex was designed to make every dollar count so you can focus on what really matters, building your dream. So whether you're just getting started or you're ready to take on the next big thing, Brex has your back. Check it out and see why the world's most innovative startups like Anthropic, Scale AI, and Robinhood trust Brex.
And why did buying Hotels.com and Expedia make sense at the time? Why were you kind of buying or they weren't competitors, or how?
Oh no, they were competitors and they hated each other.
So it was a consolidation thing?
We like the category. We're just the hypothesis was travel is moving online and we want to ride that wave. It actually, it's funny how things work. Kind of one thing leads to the other. We first saw it in Ticketmaster. All right, so Barry bought Ticketmaster from Vulcan Ventures, Paul Allen's company. And what we saw with Ticketmaster at the time was 50% of their sales were in Ticketmaster outlets in record stores. There were these things called record stores way back then. Have you been to a record store?
I have been to one, yes.
You're not that young.
Yes.
There you go.
As a kid, I went to.
And then half were sold over the phone. Ticketmaster did a deal with America Online, and whoosh, volume started going online. So we're like, what other categories look like ticketing where it's virtual goods? We don't want to take an Amazon and like fulfillment, building a fulfillment ecosystem. Virtual goods where you needed advanced reservations, where the channel were phone or in person. Travel, right? So it's like you need a travel agent. You went to a travel store, you called a travel agent. You need a reservation, no fulfillment costs whatsoever. So it was a bet on travel overall, the category. The two management teams, Expedia and Hotels.com, hated each other. But we as owners could benefit from the growth of both.
Makes sense. Okay, so you moved to Seattle. You went to be CEO. I guess like what were some of the biggest like expectation versus reality of like operating and being a CEO?
So for me, originally, even though I was CEO of the company, I was still running the company as a holding company. The Expedia was a holding company. We had Expedia.com, Hotels.com, et cetera. We hadn't integrated anything. And for us then, the big challenge was actually Expedia was a part of the business that was doing the worst because it was competing against the airlines. I had to fire my president who was running Expedia twice. I got it wrong. The third time I went to the board and I said, clearly I haven't identified what's needed to be the president of Expedia. If I fail the third time, you guys should fire me. Barry, of course, in the meeting, you've been on Expedia board meeting, he's like, yes, we will, if you get it wrong again. So at that point, I decided I was going to run Expedia myself. I'd be the CEO of the holding company and I would run Expedia myself and understand what it takes to be president, kind of an operator. And I discovered I was having so much fun. Like this holding company thing, running a business, building a culture, working with your technical staff, like that was a really, really fun stuff. Building product was amazing. And so I kind of discovered that I actually enjoyed operations a lot more than, financial holding company stuff. And that kind of got me started.
If we look at the Expedia story, right? Like I would say elephant in the room is like obviously the whole booking situation, how that evolved, right?
Yeah.
And you've now, with the benefit of hindsight, maybe explain me like what happened. Like what is your version of why kind of booking is where it is versus Expedia?
Yeah, definitely. Painful story. And during my years, both companies did well, but booking did better. And I think two lessons there. One is that if you're building an aggregation platform, supply is king. Expedia and Hotels.com kind of built more. It was more about audience. Hey, how do I build audience? How do I build a brand? And then if I build audience and a brand, what supply can I bring on board to fulfill that demand, so to speak? Booking.com started with supply first, which is, hey, I'm just going to go out and add every single hotel in a particular marketplace. And each hotel is another opportunity to sell to a new audience. And the more hotels, if Expedia kind of had 50 hotels in a market and if Booking.com had 200 hotels in a market, that market would convert better for Booking.com than Expedia. So supply, running a supply-led business was a lesson for me. And the second was actually starting from a low margin position. Expedia at the time when I joined had a take rate of about 30%. Booking.com had a take rate of 15%. We thought 30 was better because we could make more money per transaction. We could put that money into advertising, build more audience, and we would beat Booking.com at the audience game. But what Booking got right was because they were charging 15%, they were able to sign up more supply. And again, supply brought them audience. So the two lessons are, one is start from a low margin position and build up your margins over time. And they have. At Expedia, we had to reduce our margins over a period of time. And then second is supply is king.
So I guess obviously you are extremely smart, very super smart. You're kind of going through it. What were the decisions that you were like, look, these were the right decisions for us, but it turned out to be kind of just a bad outcome? And which ones were like, hey, actually, with the information we had, we could have made this decision better?
Yeah. So I think in hindsight, we could have, we got the supply memo a bit too late, a couple of years too late. And then once we started organizing against it, we had like a great 5-6 year run against Booking.com and Priceline. The toughest part was actually the margins, is taking down revenue margins from 30% to 15%, literally cutting your revenue as a public company, incredibly painful. So every year, and you can identify what you're losing, which is a huge amount of profitability when you cut margins. You can't identify what you're gaining. Supplier may be a little bit less angry at you, for example. It's just hard to identify the return from cutting your margins. And that was, again, 6-7 year journey that we went through, cutting revenue margin. That was really painful as a public company, but we had to do it. In hindsight, I wish we had done it faster.
And do you think that maybe the right decision back then was that it been to take the company private to go through this?
Maybe if it would have let us execute on the transition faster. Yeah.
Because I can imagine being CEO is man, if I cut my margins by half, my stock is going to drop
totally
80% or something like that.
Totally.
It's going to be a disaster. The employee comp, everything, right?
And that is, I think that the employee comp and kind of the stock price, et cetera, employees take stock price as a shortcut for success. And no matter how many times as CEO, I told them, don't look at the stock price. Next thing they would do is look at the stock price. So it was a tough transition to maneuver through, but over kind of the years that I was Expedia, the stock did great. But if we had been supply first, they could have done a bit better.
Makes sense. In terms of M&A, right, that you did during that time, what were your lessons then about that?
My lessons then were that to have ultimate clarity in M&A as to what your plan is early, and that the middle is a killer. So I've seen circumstances where companies try to integrate some parts of the business and then not all parts of the business, and that nowhere land is a disaster. So either you have to decide, I'm not going to integrate at all. So for example, when we bought TripAdvisor, we ran TripAdvisor as a separate entity right up until the very, very end. We actually spun off at one point. It was really successful because Steve Koffer, who was the entrepreneur there, he was truly independent. He could do what he wanted, and we supported that. And it was clear from the very, very beginning. Contrast that with, we bought Travelocity, which looked a lot like Expedia, different brand. We integrated that company in 9 months, and the company went from 3,000 employees or so to a couple of hundred. It was a big, fast integration, incredibly successful as well. When we got into the middle, that's where things became muddy. And when things are muddy in business, it's a beginning of the end.
No, that's a great lesson. So how many years were you running Expedia for?
13 years. Almost 13 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a long ride. It was awesome.
Then, so tell me, how did the Uber start happen? How did that whole story?
Yeah. So, Uber at the time was a basket case. It was in the news all over the place.
What's the first time you heard about the company?
Oh, I heard about the company as a customer. I use Uber all the time. Whenever I came to New York to meet with investors, I was on Uber constantly. I loved the product. It was magic, absolute magic. I had actually seen Travis at one of the Sun Valley conferences. He made a great presentation, very charismatic person there. And then Uber kind of fell into this negative cycle in terms of the delete Uber days, et cetera. And there was this drama as to who was going to run the company, this drama between Benchmark and Travis. And it was actually at the Sun Valley conference. I was having drinks with Daniel Ek. Daniel, myself, and my wife said, and he's like, did a headhunter call you about Uber? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, I said, no way I'm doing that. I'm at Expedia, 13 years. I've been working with Barry. There's a lot of trust there. I love it. I'm happy. And he looks at me. He's like, since when is life about happiness, Dara? He's like, you're right for this company. You can have an impact. And maybe it was at drinks or talking to me, but my wife and I are like, all right, let's check this out. And so I called the headhunter back. I remember the next day in the parking lot of Sun Valley, I called the headhunter back. And got into the process with a lot of trepidation because it was a public process. It's like Jeff Immelt was part of it, and
Meg Whitman.
Meg Whitman, yeah, good memory. Meg Whitman was part of it. So I didn't want to be thrown in this public spotlight, and there's always like, who's going to be the next one? And so,
and Expedia is a public company too, right? Like
exactly, yeah. But it's just a different scale and different. I was not Jeff Immelt or Meg Whitman in terms of my profile. That's fine. I was very comfortable with that. So I was really worried about it becoming public. So I decided to call Barry, and I said, "Hey Barry, this is something I'm thinking about. I didn't want you to find out about it through the press." He hung up on me, and I told my wife, Sid, I'm like, "All right, I'm out of a job." But then he called me the next day, and he's like, "Okay, I would do the same if I were you. How can I help?"
Oh, wow.
So actually, through the whole process, Barry and I, I honestly didn't expect to get the job. Again, I was this third candidate against some legendary business figures.
And just to give people some context, right? Like, I think they probably won't know the names. Like, tell a little bit, who are these other two people so people can get
Jeffrey Immelt had been the CEO of GE, which was, one of the biggest companies. Company. And Meg Whitman had been the CEO of eBay, which is a marketplace company, and had really taken eBay to its heights at the time. Now eBay has competitively suffered a bit. So they were, huge business figures. And so Barry and I, we would have fun like chatting about it and gossiping about it. I actually remember the final presentation I made to the Uber board, Barry helped me on that presentation. So it just tells you a lot about the person, which is it wasn't in his financial interest or business interest to help me out. But as a person, he was there for me.
What was the process like? You said you had to do a presentation. Like, what was can't even imagine what the process looked like.
So
it's like a Shark Tank. Everyone comes and does their presentation.
I don't know really, but I showed up. It was on a weekend. I think it was a Sunday. I showed up to a Sunday or Saturday to a law firm office, and the board was there. And I made my presentation. It was controversial. And they asked me a couple of questions. I remember one of them asked me what my Uber rating was. And I looked up my Uber rating. I think the Uber rating was like a 4.78 or so. And there was this hush went over the room because I guess that's not a very good Uber rating. So I'm like, all right, I'm screwed. I'm out of this. But one way or the other, they picked me.
That's awesome. How was it when you got the call that they were going to pick you?
It was, I got the call from Ariana Huffington, and she goes, I'm not going to try to pretend I'm her. She goes, Dara, I've got good news and bad news. Which do you want first? I said, give me the bad news. She said, well, the fact that you are a candidate has already leaked. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I looked at my New York Times notification, and it's like, and what it said is, Dara Khosrowshahi is going to be the candidate to be the Uber CEO. So she's like, the good news is we want you to be our new CEO. And I'm like, Ariana, I haven't accepted yet. How can you do this to me? You can't put me in this position. I have no idea who leaked it, but it put me, myself, Barry in a very, very tough spot. We got through it.
Yeah, no, I can't imagine.
Weird way to figure out. It was parking lot. I was grocery shopping at the time.
And so you were more happy or worried?
I was happy. I was excited, that this was a new challenge, and I knew that it was going to be a big challenge, and it was a turnaround. But to some extent, Expedia was a turnaround for me, and so I had turned a company around. I kind of knew that I had it in me, I guess, but I felt really badly for Expedia because it's not the way that I wanted to go. Right? I've been at this company for 13 years. It was my baby, and for the company to find out in that way wasn't great.
And like, what, compared to the presentation you had and the plan you had in your head of what we were going to do, like what turned out to be like expectation versus reality, I guess?
It was actually from an operational standpoint, I was pretty on, which is I want to work with the engineering teams and the product teams to continue to innovate the way that Uber had innovated. And I thought there was a lot of potential in mobility and delivery as well. So that operationally, like I was looking at the presentation 4 or 5 years ago, I'm like, hey, this was pretty on, because it was like innovation to drive growth, but then also discipline. And I was a more mature CEO to bring discipline and get the company to profitability. The parts of the business that I was completely unfamiliar with were being in the public eye. It was just something that was really different. Like I was on CNBC at Expedia, but the media glare on Uber at the time, and to some extent still, was something I never experienced. Working with regulators, working in a regulated industry was something that was really new. And then raising money. I never had to raise money. And it's a really important skill set for a private company and a CEO. So those were all kind of new muscles I had to learn.
That's super interesting. So how long before you joined in the IPO?
I think I joined 2017. I think we went public 2 or 3 years later after that. And it was a tough IPO because it was an incredibly competitive segment at the time. Lyft was throwing a bunch of money into the market. Didi was throwing a bunch of money into the market. So it was not an IPO that was up and to the right. People were really questioning at the time whether Uber could ever be profitable. But we proved them wrong.
What do you think is if you had to get the ride sharing industry journey, right, and separate it into a couple phases of maturity, how would you break it down?
Yeah. So, first thing I would say is that ride sharing rhymed a lot with travel, which is it was all about supply, right? It was a supply-led business. And one of the things that Travis and team got right is they went out there and established market and grew the supply base very, very quickly. Second was that it was planting flags market after market after market. So Uber expanded incredibly quickly, and basically an Uber GM was the CEO of the business on a local basis, everywhere on a local basis. And these were empowered teams who grew up very, very quickly. That was a model that really worked well in terms of early adoption, so to speak, but it wasn't a business that could scale because every single GM was doing their thing differently. There were huge local teams. And so over a long period of time, we have automated a lot of what was happening on the ground in terms of pricing and matching and surge, et cetera. Essentially, algorithms have replaced people to some extent. And we built algorithmic pricing, algorithm matching in a way that has allowed the business to scale and then scale in a way that's been really profitable as well. And then after that initial phase, we kind of transitioned not just from mobility, but to mobility of multiple types of transport. So X and then reserve and black, 2-wheelers, 3-wheelers. Uber now even has taxi on the platform. We used to be the enemy of taxi. Now we work really closely with our taxi partners. So then the expansion of kind of the product that we had on the ground was another phase that we went into. And then, of course, eventually getting into Uber Eats, and not just mobility for people, but mobility and delivery of anything and everything.
I think what Travis did wrong got widely reported over the years. But I'm curious from your perspective, when you got to the company, what are the things you think he got right?
He got a lot right. I would say the most important thing that he got right was Travis had an eye and a deep appreciation of talent. He would he would ask his network, who is the best economist out there who can help me in terms of marketplace dynamics, because there are a lot of second order effects to building out a marketplace and pricing out that marketplace. And he would go get that economist. And so the talent bar that we have at Uber to this day remains very, very high because A players hire A players. And I think that came from Travis. And I recognized it and kind of kept it going. But it's very easy with companies, especially when companies that are in a hurry to grow, to lower the talent bar to actually kind of bring in a lot of team members. We were never willing to lower the talent bar. If it took 8 months to find the right person, we'll take 8 months versus a month to find a B person. So that was definitely something that he had. And then, to this day, one of our values at the company is go get it. It's literally what we do. But go get it is a statement about the culture of this company. This is a company that is going to be aggressive. We are going to go after every single opportunity that we have. We'll do it respectfully. We'll work with regulators, et cetera. But it's a company that at its core is entrepreneurial and aggressive and loves to build. And again, I think those were all characteristics that Travis and, he had a lot of people working with him, that founding team kind of imbued within the company.
When you joined Uber, how much money was the company losing roughly back then?
I think it was losing about 2.5 to 3 billion a year.
And now you just released earnings. Like, how much are you making a year in cash flow?
We're free cash flow for the past 12 months has been 8.5 billion. It'll easily exceed 10 billion next year.
So how did that happen? Like, what were the main things that you did that took a company from losing 3 billion to making it $500 million, still growing bottom line, 15, 20, 25, something like that?
No,
right?
Bottom line is 30+%.
Yeah, 30+% growing. What did you do?
And top line 20%. So it's been good. One is you have to grow the top line. We're a growth company. So I think when I took over, the business was doing about 35 billion in gross bookings. The business now is at a $200 billion run rate. So this is a business that has kept compounding, and it's moving into other forms of transportation. We're constantly finding other ways of transportation to wire up. Started with cars, went to restaurant delivery. Now we're going grocery. Now we're going to go to all retail. So the opportunity to kind of wire up all movement and build this next generation kind of on-demand logistics platform is awesome, and we're nowhere close to any kind of a slowdown as it relates to growth. And then the second is, I brought operating discipline to the company, which is, I do think that ourselves and a bunch of other companies went through a phase where capital was a weapon. And basically it was about how much money can you raise in order to spend to capture markets. And the having an enormous amount of capital to spend actually hurts operating discipline, because you can, it's painful to optimize these businesses. If you build an incredible algorithm that is able to predict demand versus, let's say, you can match based on actual demand in a market. You can match based on predicted demand in a market. And if you match on predicted demand, that is more efficient than based on actual demand. That's one little product that the team has built. It's actually a pretty cool product. That kind of efficiency can bring, let's say, 1% efficiency into a market, and then you have 15 of those projects, and lo and behold, you're growing the company, kind of compounding the company at attractive rates. In the early days, someone would throw $100 million into the market, and all of that work would be blown away. So to some extent, the excess capital actually worked against excellent operations. And so for me, the art was kind of pulling the capital back over a period, and then driving excellent operations and efficiency across the company. And it's something that we've been able to do now, which is we're able to keep innovating, build out new products like teens, or getting into autonomous, and at the same time have a bottom line that grows significantly in excess than our top line.
So let's talk about it. So, if we just look at total kind of costs, or let's call it SG&A for the company, what's that roughly that number? I'd probably disclose order of magnitude.
Yeah, I mean the company does about will run rate of 200 billion. Our take rate there, true take rate, because accounting is a little funky, is probably 20%. So that's about call it 40 billion that we bring into revenue, and profitability off of that is probably 8.5 to 9 billion. So overhead is about 3 to 4 billion for us.
So that means that's 3 or 4 billion that you're kind of allocating every year, right? You're basically allocating capital. How do you do that, right? How do you do that at scale? And what do you think, when you were kind of operating a holding company, you were allocating capital in some way. Now, in some way, it's also allocating capital. What's different about those two ways, and how do you do it today?
Well, allocating operational capital's harder. And listen, there isn't a science to it. You kind of can look at it and come up with all kinds of theories. But throughout my career, there's no perfect way to allocate capital. You can be informed, and then there's judgment. And I would say the pattern for Uber in the past 6-7 years is use technology to allow you to essentially automate a bunch of, call it overhead functions, and or improve customer service, reduce error rates, match more effectively, price more effectively. So, and if you're able to use tech to do so, you can grow revenue without growing your overheads.
How does that process actually work? Like someone shows up and that's like, hey, like I want to automate this part, give me some engineers. Like how does that actually work?
You have engineering teams. So you may have a team that you may have 100 people working on food and grocery search. You may have 200 people working in customer service, et cetera. So you have pools of engineers essentially who are focused on different teams. And then each of those teams will have priorities that they're running through. Hey, here are the 10 projects that we can get done. Here's a cut line based on the number of engineers that we have. And then below the cut line, there's always like amazing ideas below the cut line that we're not funding. And I think that's actually a good sign. It's frustrating. But to me, a company that has more ideas than it has capital, that's kind of a good signal in terms of its growth. And we will then look at where the cut line is for the different groups, customer service, marketplace, rider experience, driver experience, eater search, et cetera. We look at all the projects below the cut line, and that is probably the biggest indication of where we're going to allocate capital. If there are projects that look like they're home runs, but they don't hit the cut line, that's where we'll put more engineers. And in the past 5 years, the vast majority of our growth in headcount has come on the engineering product design side.
So one of the things that I remember early in tech, I think it was Peter Thiel or Eric Schmidt, someone was talking about Google, which means like if you make too much money, it means you probably run out of good ideas kind of thing. And, clearly like there was something not exactly right about that, you have this now company is doing $8.5 billion of cash flow. You're saying that like there's some stuff below the cut line.
Totally.
How do you choose like what's the right level to invest? Like why not just do everything and just hire more and all that?
Well, because one is having that cut line forces a discipline. If you can get everything done, then you get messy, teams get too big. So part of what you're trying to do is psychologically, you want teams to want to drive that cut line lower with the same team that they have. Instead of having 10 engineers work on a project, have 8 engineers work harder on that project. So I think that discipline, like this is a place that we work hard. Like I tell people, Uber's not a place to come to if you want work-life balance. Like it's just not. You're going to work your ass off. You're going to be expected to work some weekends, not every weekend. We're going to give you flexibility, but you're here to work. This is not a lifestyle company. So I think it creates a culture of people hustling, so to speak. That's the big benefit. And then, I think that if you have that cut line at a level where there's some good projects that are missing, it just forces the best ideas to be the ideas that you're executing on. Because, we fail, like probably a third to a half of our projects don't work. And so that the more capital you throw at something, the higher the percentage of the stuff that's not going to work. So it drives the best ideas. The best ideas, it's kind of this competition Darwinian competition amongst the best ideas. And I think that Darwinian competition, if every single idea can survive, then you're not going to have the best ideas make their way to the top.
So maybe as the way to think about it is like almost like, hey, you want to do the most amount of work that you can still keep an excellence bar for.
Exactly.
You don't want to like let it get sloppy because there's too much resources.
An excellence bar and then a bar for people working hard.
Yeah.
I think that culture, again, as companies get larger, some of the work culture can get softer, and that's not something we want here.
And what would be the sign if you went too far on this and being like, oh, we're being too stingy, or like, how would you know?
I don't know. And that's where like business people think you can reduce business to numerical elements, and there's a bunch of judgment there. Our culture is a culture that loves rallying. And for me, it's having that rally culture and having that hard work culture is what allows me to know that kind of we're skating on that edge that I want the company skating on.
Let's move to AV, which is
Yeah.
obviously like a huge topic, right? I guess like one of the things that I think you did was you eventually decided to cut Uber's AV program directly. Looking back, was that the right decision?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. But, time will tell. We cut back on AV during COVID, which was an emergency for the company. We went from losing $2 billion to losing $3.5 billion or so. And we only had so much time to get to profitability. We were going to run out of cash. So there was a necessity there to some extent. But the other factor for me is that, companies have cores that they're great at. And we were a software company. We're great at building algorithms, building search, matching, et cetera. We weren't a great hardware company. And hardware is really tough. The cycles are different. It's multi-year cycles versus, multi-week cycles, so to speak, which is how we operate at. So I kind of concluded that it wasn't something that we were truly going to be great at. There was a set of companies that were just working on AV, and it was life or death for them. For us, it was important, but it was a little bit of a side project. And then the necessity of COVID forced us to get out. And the other element that was really important to me is that because we were building our own AV, no one else in the ecosystem wanted to work with us because they were competitive with us. And so our hypothesis was that AV was not going to be winner take all. There are going to be multiple players who were going to win. And in order to play with the greatest talent base in the ecosystem, we needed to become a neutral party, and that we would actually go and actively kind of fund the ecosystem and build up the ecosystem and be a participant in it and help the ecosystem grow versus trying to build our own competitor. So I think it's the right decision, but only time will tell.
Do you think that the AV thing is going to happen kind of like little by little, then all at once, or it will be incremental over like some period of time?
I think the way I put it is little by little by little, and then all at once. In that, if the vehicles are cheap enough and safe enough, then the economics of AV are spectacular. And not only will they be, huge opportunity for ride sharing as it exists, they will extend the TAM hugely of the overall mobility pie. But it takes hardware platforms that are both safe and cheap. And we're probably 2 generations away from that hardware platform
What's
right now.
What's the bottleneck right now?
The bottleneck right now is a lot of the sensors, compute, and then the software are essentially intermingled. You don't have industry set APIs that are formulating. It's as industry matures and standards are going to come into play. So, for example, we announced a effort with NVIDIA where they are building the next generation AV stack with Hyperion, and they are building their own L4 software that they're going to essentially offer to all vehicle operators. And we will bring the network, we'll do data collection, and then we'll run fleet management as well. And then the OEMs can focus on manufacturing cars. And if you have a future where 10 years from now, every single new car sold comes L4 ready and is $50,000, $60,000, that is a very, very compelling economic proposition. But you need a couple of generations of cars, and compute's probably there, but a couple of generations of cars to get there.
And what do you think of the arguments around Tesla, around the kind of like vertical integration and the data collection and the manufacturing in the US and all these things? Yeah, and to put them in a good spot.
Well, there's a lot there, but I think Tesla they have gotten the hardware bill of materials to an industry leading level in the US. The Chinese OEMs can match it and then some. But in the US, I think in terms of bill of materials, Tesla's the leader. What they haven't yet proven is that a camera-only system can be safe enough as it relates to AV. And time will tell on that one.
Why do you think that's the hill Elon dies on?
I think that he thinks from a first principle standpoint. And fact is, human drivers have 2 eyes and they can drive. So Why can't a car, which is a computer with wheels, have 8 eyes and do the same? Now, eventually, that sounds right. But the question is, over the next 5 years, over the next 10 years, as AV is developing, are we going to get there quick enough? I think the other thing that probably has taken some folks by surprise is that the cost of these alternative LiDARs, for example, and radar, the cost for LiDARs come from like 40,000 a LiDAR now to a couple of hundred. So the hardware curves have come down probably faster than industry expected.
Yeah. So like, why not just add a LiDAR there to be better than humans, I guess, like if we could have eyes on our back, we'd be probably better off.
Yeah. I can't speak for them. I mean, the one thing I would say is Tesla is economically motivated to make L3 Plus or L4 work for the fleet that they already have on the ground.
True.
So that could be a factor. But again, I think Elon is probably convinced, it's also possible scientifically, which probably is something that he cares about.
And for food delivery is a different situation, right?
Very, yeah. Yeah, food delivery is going to be a combination. There isn't going to be, with mobility, autonomous vehicle can work on most use cases. Now you have to map out your domain, et cetera. So it's going to take some time for autonomous to get there. And certainly it's going to take time for the hardware cost to come down. We think delivery is going to be a combination of sidewalk robots that we have in place. We've got 10 partnerships now all around the world. Serve, Cardigan, AvRide, AV-Ride, and a bunch of others. And these are like little cute, I don't know if you've seen them, these robots that walk along the sidewalks for short deliveries. They're not around in New York yet. So that's one. And then there'll be drones. So there'll be drone delivery that gets you deliveries longer distances in the suburbs. And there are a number of players there. We recently made an investment in Flytrex, who we're going to partner up with. And I think we'll have some other partners. And then there might be an in-between, which is like bike lane robots or maybe, cars. Although I think that's probably too much of too expensive a bill of materials to carry around food.
And, you always ran companies that I would say were, they were tech companies, but like they were somewhat not like the most advanced technology. If you think about it, like, with Expedia compared to self-driving cars, which is like at the, like forefront of technology. And, I would put Brex in that category too, right? It's all kind of known tech compared to bleeding edge foundational model tech. How do you now that this is such an important piece for the business, how do you learn about it, manage it? How do you decide how to make these bets and this such technologically complex part of the business now?
I mean, I'm definitely moving up on the technology curve coming to Uber, because Uber really does work with bleeding edge tech, especially if you think about the scale in which we operate, right? Like we got models that are making 10 million predictions per second as far as what the next most efficient match or the price is going to be. So I think there's really cool bleeding edge tech at Uber that works in the real world and can adjust instantaneously to the real world, which is really cool. It's a different skill set, but one that's really, really cool from an edge build kind of a perspective. So I do think that Uber comes with it kind of it is a heavy, heavy tech business. And then what we do is we hire from industry. So we've hired a bunch of folks who worked at Cruise or Waymo and other AV shops. And the combination of that technical know-how with the operational and scale kind of technology that we built, those engineering teams come together, and then I get to jam with them on what the future is going to look like. It's part of the business that I have the most fun with.
How do you know who to trust?
I think that getting to know your engineers and who are the ones who don't bullshit and the ones who deliver, it's just like anything else in business, which is track record as well. One thing I found with engineers is there are some engineers who overcomplicate, and so they'll get into the technical depth and confuse things, and then there's some engineers who simplify, and so those are the kind of engineers who they can very, very simply explain kind of deep technical concepts. And in the end, these concepts aren't that difficult. They're just hard to execute. Those are the engineers that I tend to work with. But we've got a great team here. We've known each other for a long time. And we've been through battles. Like Uber has not been up and to the right. Like it's been a kind of bumpy run. And you get to know them and you trust the ones who deliver, just like you trust anyone in business.
As we're kind of getting through the end here, wanted to ask a little bit about the reflections and learnings now on Uber, which is like, what do you think, if you had to boil down to, let's say, 3 decisions that you got right, and then 3 decisions that you got wrong and you had to adjust in your Uber journey, like what would they be?
In my Uber journey?
Yeah. Obviously, you made a lot less mistakes in Uber than you did in the past as you have more experience.
Yeah. So one, I would say, decision that I got right was betting on safety. Early on, we weren't as tight on our processes as I think that I wanted to be. And it was standing for safety was like one of the first things that we stood for. And to some sense, safety, like making sure that every single driver that you bring on board is background check, et cetera. It can slow down processes. It can add cost. But when it comes to safety, you can't cost out safety. So that was, I think, a really great bet. Second bet was actually, when I first came on, there was a lot of like, who's pro-Travis and who's anti-Travis. There was a lot of political BS going on. And I was like, I don't give a shit who's pro-Travis. Like, if you're pro-Uber and you're good, I'm with you. So I kind of didn't play those games one way or the other. I just, I'm going to meet you and I'm going to judge you based on what I see, not what someone else tells me about you. So I was able to take some of that political edge off. And then the third, I would say that we definitely got right was betting on Eats, like in a big way early on. It was losing billions early on, and it's now making billions. So that was an important bet. We're the only player that's very big in mobility and very big in delivery as well. Mistakes. God, you're making this painful for me. I'd say one mistake was that we focused too much on the big cities. Uber was in the big cities. Uber was a big city business. That's where mobility was. Started in Paris and then New York and Sao Paulo. Those are our biggest cities, London. And it turns out there's a huge market outside of the large cities, especially with delivery, suburbs, less sparse areas. It's actually one of our top growth areas now. 7-8 years in, we're still growing at like 1.5 to 3 times the speed that we're growing in the big cities. And we could have focused on that earlier. So I think that was a mistake. And then, we made some moves that I regret. Like we got out of food in India. It's a huge market. It's a challenging market. But I would have liked to be multi-platform the way we are in mobility and delivery in the US and the UK. The platform gives us huge advantages in terms of Uber just being a part of your everyday life. And while those were good financial decisions at the time, I'd love to be in food in some of the countries that we pulled out of.
And if you had to like encapsulate some of the learnings that you had from those two, and what for future decisions, like what did you learn that you're going to do differently as like more of a framework? Is there anything that?
So I think one is don't allow your business to overfit your current market. We overfitted to big cities and we completely ignored the suburbs because we just made assumptions about the suburbs that turned out to be wrong. So I'd say that's the biggest one. Would I have truly at the time, would I have made a different decision on India based on the competitive environment? I don't know. It's just I wish I didn't have to make that decision. It could have been the right decision.
That makes sense. Super, super helpful. Dara, this was amazing. You were like so candid and, I learned a ton from this. So I really appreciate you making time.
It was a pleasure
to do this with us.
And I'll see you at the next board meeting.
Exactly. I'll see you soon.
Take care.
Awesome.
Thanks to our friends at Atomic Growth for helping with production and distribution.